beyond that. Would you just introduce yourself first and tell us what your position here is at ATEC?
Okay. So my name is Maximilian Schich. I'm an associate professor in arts and technology, and I'm also a member of the Edith O'Donnell Institute of Art History, which is the rooms we're sitting in here. And so basically I teach art history, but I also am invested in cultural data science, information visualization, and so on. So the idea is to study visual material and produce it at the same time in order to understand the history of culture.
So, as you know, we're doing some research on the wide field of what's called public art. Mm-hmm. And obviously, we've been getting some great interviews from a lot of different people here in ATEC and elsewhere about what their perspectives are in kind of the present situation of public art and where it may be going. Mm-hmm. And obviously, you've got a lot of interaction as an art historian mm-hmm. in public art. Can you tell us anything about your background parallel to public art?
Mm-hmm. So one of the most striking things that comes to mind when you think about public art is I'm from Germany, which is a very different country in terms of how it treats museums and art in general. So in that country, there is if you build a house and it's public, or it's if it's public facing, let's put it like that. So you're an insurance company and you build a large structure for 10,000 workers, you need to allocate a certain percentage of your budget towards public art on the building, okay? Which is obviously a kind of way, it's sort of a tax that allows you, but of course you can choose the art, but there needs to be some embellishment going on. And at the same time, there is more building code, like in a city where you could only build to a certain level in terms of how many stories your building has, and the story height would be normed and stuff like that. So that's one thing that's interesting. The other thing that's interesting is that if you ask a German who the museums belong to, right? Most of them are state-owned, which means they're democratically owned by the people, which is a very, very different concept as here, because it leads to this fact that you take museums for granted, right? And people are sort of, they don't like it if you cut budgets of museums, for example. While here, it's very different. Here you have this kind of coalition of the willing, if you like, going on, of people who have money and people who have little money but give little money, and lots of people giving little money. You have the same effect. You have public museums. Something like the Dallas Museum of Art, right, wouldn't exist without the donors, in essence. And so there's different cultures, and that gives different notions. So with that experience, I think it's interesting and it's sort of an automatism to think about these kind of things. So how natural is it that you take museums for granted in Germany, or how natural is it that you should not expect the public to spend money on museums, which are two extreme thoughts. Where in this country we get more extreme right now, right? If you cut funding for the National Endowment of the Arts, National Endowment of the Humanities, PBS, and so on, and NPR, this is obviously something where where there needs to be some thought. How much money is it? Will this be replaced? Is there a kind of art that is made possible by this that wouldn't exist but benefits society, or vice versa? So these are important discussions which come to mind.
Yeah, so obviously there are cultural differences in how mm-hmm. cultures look at public art. Mm-hmm. Most people, when you talk about public art, they think obviously about museums, mm-hmm. but and some incredible collection of cultural artifacts in our museums wherever they are around mm-hmm. the world. What about stuff beyond the museum mm-hmm. that could be considered public art?
That's a very good question. the thing that comes to mind when you think about art beyond the museum, beyond the art circus, you may say, beyond the biennial art and so on, is in a very, very categorical sense, Marcel Duchamp, who said, can there be any works which are not of art? Right? So you can ask yourself, is there anything where, anything that's done by humans, which is not in some sense also an artifact? And you may question if this is artful, but think about the design of the Apple I computer by Steve Wozniak. If you wrap your head around a little bit about electrical engineering, you will figure out it's not only useful, it's not only a piece of engineering, it's a really artful piece of engineering. And in that sense, I would say it's art. Art does also not necessarily mean it's good. So, art is not by necessity beautiful, it's not by necessity good, but it's something that is made by us, right? And in that sense, in a very broad sense, you may find art everywhere. At the same time, even in the narrow restrictive sense of what is treated by art history, what is sold at the art market, what is exhibited in museums and in the biennials and in the art fairs, publicity, I mean, not advertising, but being public, is something that is crucial to art. You may even ask the question, is there such a thing as a division between public art and non-public art? Yeah. If you think about the American concept of public art, reminds me very much of public history, right? Which in other countries is called the pedagogics or education of history / museums. If you look at the university discipline, this is teaching that. And in a very same way, one may suspect that by the use of public art, that there is a kind of categorization going on, which excludes other art that is non-public. And let me give you a very, very simple explanation for this. If you own a Van Gogh painting that's $30 million, say, and you don't exhibit it, meaning it's not exposed to the public, but you put it, and this is common practice among art collection owners, you put it into the free harbor of Geneva in some locked away, AC controlled storage closet, people will forget about it over time, and the value of the piece of work will go down. And so there's a very clear correlation one can measure between the value of a piece of art and how well it is known in public. So this is something really interesting, right? Because all of a sudden, you may even imagine a competition among art collectors to exhibit their artworks. Yeah. While, we may have a concept which is probably as abbreviated and as incorrect as public art as this separate category of the art collectors as the recluse who doesn't show his art, right, or her art. So I think there's this kind of there's two layers. Being public is one layer, being art is another layer, and there may be complex overlap between the two.
So let's move on to, you're one of our thought leaders here, obviously, in art and technology. And one of the areas we're kind of pushing, looking into is can technology enhance the social experience of public art? So do you have any views on that or insights?
Can technology enhance
the individual or social experience?
The social experience of art.
Yeah.
So I could be polemic up front, which is the word ars for art and the word techne, which is the root of technology, have almost the same meaning in Greek. So there's not much difference between the two. And, here's an iPad with a little pen, here's a clay tablet with a little stylus. With the clay tablet, your library is the size of the university campus, but, it's the idea is the same. So, of course, exposing art to society is an interaction process, right? It's not only, oh, you show art, and so there's a painting on the wall, and people show up, but no, it's an interactive process. As Kevin Kelly said in the 90s, the producers are the audience, right? So any artist who does something has seen other art probably nowadays. And of course, this accelerates with our technological means. Now you have millions of self-portraits being produced every day. They're on Instagram. But does that make traditional painting go away? Self-portrait painting, for example? Probably not. I mean, there is an amount of energy you put into that, right? So art has ever been about technology, right? I mean, look about if you want to have little shells with a little hole in it so you can put them on beads, which may be a piece of art and or money. A couple of thousand years ago, totally technology, you need a drill. If you go a little bit further, look at a Bernini church, for example, that's totally technology. It's lighting, it's how to work with stone, how do you deal with the surface and so on. They did play the same game, right? So in the making of the episode 1 Star Wars movie, the people who did the race through the canyons with the flying racers, they said what we do is landscape painting at 1,000 kilometers per hour. And I would say the first part of that sentence is the important one, is landscape painting. There's no difference. And you can optimize towards looking real, you can optimize towards looking, giving an expression that evokes emotions and so on, but we're still in the same process. I don't make any difference. I mean,
between art and technology.
The only difference is that art historians tend to bucketize art history because it makes them more comfortable. And we just have to accept that the world is not comfortable.
So do you have any personal anecdotes or experiences in your life of appreciating art, public art, if you will, that you'd like to share with us? Any that stand out in your memory about, they were like, wow.
Public art that stands out?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the world needs Banksy.
What is that?
Banksy is an artist who makes social comment, and he's unsellable because his work is usually destroyed after a couple of hours, and he's the Rubens of our times, right? So Rubens was a diplomat who produced paintings. He's now known as a painter, but often they were given as diplomatic comment on the relation between his home country and other countries. And Banksy has a very similar function, right? So there is this kind of, if you look at his new hotel at the Wall in Jerusalem, with the non-view across the street, like an awful view. The Wall is like 5 meters across the street, and people on the two sides of the street, they all eat hummus. If you're a tourist, you can taste it on both sides. Both is awesome, and they both think they have invented it. Without people like Banksy, Marina Abramović would be another example, Joseph Beuys, I think the world would be ultimately poorer. And it totally makes sense for a society to afford people like that. I think this is very important. It's just like Churchill said, if you give up on funding of art, what are you fighting for? Mm-hmm. Right? So
great quote.
That's a big question.
I love that quote. I think I just, one of the books I was reading called The Hitmakers, the author was talking about the phenomenon of the Mona Lisa, mm-hmm. and how it was really somewhat unknown until somebody stole it. Mm-hmm. And then the value just skyrocketed based on kind of what you alluded to earlier of this. It has to be in this social collective consciousness as an artifact. Was interesting.
Do you have a question about Mona Lisa?
No, unless you have something you want to share, a perspective on it.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Mona Lisa is it's held as a mystery still, and it continues to do so. It's a little bit like documentary movies on archaeology are always mysterious, just like documentary movies on art history are always beautiful, right? Or you know, the kind of there's a kind of adjectives you or society ascribes to particular things, and Mona Lisa is one of these things that supposedly are mysterious. And there is a number of art historians who have written treatises and books about this. There is nothing mysterious about, or almost nothing mysterious about Mona Lisa. It's actually one of the paintings where we can know the most. We know who the person is, we know what's going on, and so on.
So it's not a self-portrait?
It's not a self-portrait. I think that, which is an interesting question. I mean, this is another one that's very interesting, right? Think about Caravaggio. Is he gay or not? Where Spezzafero, who's an Italian art historian, once rightly put that that's not a category that did exist in the 17th century, right? Yeah, he loved men and women, but that's not something which
a label.
It was not discussed like we discuss it, and that was not the problem, right? It was not the issue to discuss, and that is something that is very important. If you think about Leonardo da Vinci, is he genius or not? Yeah, he was a smart guy. But by putting him on this pedestal, we forget that there is all this other art which precedes him. It's not only art, because he probably wouldn't also have seen it all as art. He wanted to find out how the world works. He was curious. And there's other people like Francesco di Giorgio who did this 50 years before, and there's other people whose name we don't know who are as similarly interesting.
So let's take a hypothetical. Let's say I was Mayor Rollins and I came to you and I said, Professor, you have this incredible wealth of knowledge about art history and art in general. How can you tell me how to make the public art of Dallas better? What would you do?
I think the first question he should ask people who he thinks know to answer a question is, he should ask these people, who would you ask this question? And this is how he would find out people who really have their act together in this particular sense.
Got it.
Dallas is interesting because it has the largest population of wealthy art collectors, and most of it happens not in the Dallas Museum of Art or other public spaces. It happens in private collections.
Private.
But still, these are very impressive, as we all know, those who had the privilege to see some of them. But what Dallas does not have is a vibrant community that is similar to New York or London, right? There is no Space Invader, there is no Banksy, there is... the public art is something that is sort of strangely classic and controlled. If you look at Deep Ellum, it's not something where you would say, okay, this looks like 2017. And so don't get me wrong, this is not a critique. It's nice to hang out there, and it's nice to hang out in the design district and the arts district. But I think the attenuator of possibility is not fully turned up to the full volume. And in the competition of emerging places on Earth, if you look at places in China, if you look at places in Latin America, there is definitely space to catch up, and
Sure.
we should do that.
So probably one of the easiest answers would be to look at the leaders, look at the analogs of the places that are known for for having progressive programs in public art?
I don't know. I think there's multiple possibilities. I mean, leaders, you could think about. The previous director of the Dallas Museum of Art, Max Anderson, is now affiliated with one of these clubs of cities that have an art center, like we have. That is one possibility. There is obviously you could say, the set of art dealers in Dallas-Fort Worth, which can make their contribution. There is young people, lots of young people that are having jobs that pay pretty well, which allow them to, go have another kind of arts benefaction going on, which is going to concerts, buying works on paper, buying music, and so on. So there's a kind of different kind of role of benefaction also going on. And you could think of other models, right? Think about Oakland or Santa Fe, Provincetown. There is places where artists live together in communities, and there's very, very, very different models. And the question is, what's the right one for Dallas-Fort Worth, right? So think about the fact, what makes us special, right? I would say it's people like Jack Kilby, right? And the other thing that makes us special is north of campus, there is now as many people from all over the world living as are living in downtown Dallas. So if you think of Dallas, the TV series, so if you see this somewhere else other than Dallas, Dallas is very different from what you know from TV. There's people from probably hundreds of countries, speaking hundreds of languages. You can have any kind of cuisine. You can probably have the fusion of any two art streams in real time, because people fly home, come back, and they bring back ideas and so on. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and the key question is how to surface it. That's the key question. I think it's already there.
Good point. You have any last things you'd like to share with us about any subject?
It's a hard question to answer. I'm thinking about saying something about defunding the National Endowment of Arts, the National Endowments of the Humanities, and the public broadcasting system. Maybe one should look at the impact of the BBC World Service, the impact of nature documentaries of the BBC, the soft power of K-pop, Korean pop music, and then think about what this country wants to be. I grew up on American pop music. Pop is a weird word. All the American music that happened since 1945, I guess. The liberation of Europe was the moment when the swing orchestra landed in Paris and the conductor didn't make it. We're still inspired by that. And this is the America we love. And it's still there, but it's threatened. So you should not defund the National Endowment of Arts and Humanities. Does it make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
You're going to cut out 80%, I guess. Good. You should.